Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. We have our very first guest today. We have on Ross Watson, who is an award-winning game designer who has worked on a number of fantastic projects that I will let him tell you about. So why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction, some of the stuff that you want the audience to take note of, where they can find you on socials, Patreon, all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Ross Watson. I'm a game designer who's been in the industry for over 20 years now. I've worked on some big games, stuff like Star Wars: Edge of the Empire, Toward Eternity, Savage Worlds Rifts, and for tonight's discussion, probably the most relevant is I was the lead designer for Wrath of Glory and lead developer for Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader, Deathwatch, and deeply involved in the creation of Black Crusade and Only War. If you want to know more about me, you can find me at the Ross Watson on Twitter, and my Patreon is patreon.com/the-Ross-Watson.
Fantastic. So everyone, please do us both a favor and go check out Ross on all his socials. So why don't we just dive right on into the meat of it. So part of what prompted this whole thing in the first place was a video I did recently on kind of all the publicly available information on what happened to the old Fantasy Flight games, Warhammer 40K role-playing lines, and you have all the inside information that none of us have ever heard. So I think we're all quite interested in hearing sort of the whole story of the line, where it came from. So let's just start kind of from the top. So when these games started, it was, I don't know what year development started, but you were working with White Dwarf, as I understand it. Is that right? Before Dark Heresy started?
Yeah, I was part of the U.S. White Dwarf team from 2003 to 2005, and did a lot of battle reports and stuff. In White Dwarf number 300, you can see a bunch of my work in that one.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and after I left Games Workshop in 2005, I went to work at Fantasy Flight Games.
Oh, I see. I wasn't sure exactly when. I thought you might have. I thought that you might have been in that original Black Industries crew and then transferred over.
No, so it's really interesting because Black Industries was kind of a subcategory or a sub-label, if you will, from Black Library,
right?
Which was, a part of the Games Workshop proper, and they worked with a lot of other companies to produce tabletop role-playing game material. Like you may see a lot of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition material. A great deal of that was produced in conjunction with Green Ronin and Chris Paramus and his team. So there's actually, interestingly enough, there's a version of Dark Heresy that was created by them prior to the official release of the Black Industries book.
So we have a zeroth edition of Dark Heresy, and
it's pretty wild.
Yeah, since we're in here, do you want to give us any highlights of stuff from that dark secret version that never made it into the main editions?
Well, so there's a reason why this was never released, and there's a reason why people put together prototypes, and I'm not here to judge anybody's work. Okay, so with all that being said, the 0th edition, or that'll work. The 0th edition of Dark Heresy is surprisingly more closer to WIFRIP 2nd edition than anything else. There's a lot of different careers, stuff like speeder jock and astronaut.
Oh wow!
It's in a lot of ways it's very strange, but the core concept is still kind of there. It's about the Inquisition recruiting people to do work, but there's like some very strange fiction pieces that were written that almost remind me of like old Shadowrun fiction about like an Inquisitor going around in nightclubs and trying to find information.
Oh, very cool.
It's really bizarre. What's most interesting to me though is that the rule set. I don't know for sure if it like was inspiration for later things, but in a lot of ways it's not too dissimilar from what Rob Schwab used in A Song of Ice and Fire roleplay later on.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. But there's basically a version of Dark Heresy nobody's seen
That's very
out there.
cool.
So
Well, this is just going to keep me up at night. But yeah, so I guess just so we can set up our timeline here for our 40K role-playing history lesson, do you know roughly what year that started to formulate, and what caused, was there an inciting incident that led to these lines beginning in their earliest state?
I don't know for sure when this would have been made, but my guess would have been 2007.
Okay. So
2008
fairly soon before Dark
Yeah.
Heresy First Edition started to become a thing. Okay.
The story that was told to me by Owen Barnes and Mike Mason and Kate Flack, they're the actual creators of the Black Industries version. Okay.
Yeah.
And the story that was told to me was that the creation of Dark Heresy was very fast. It went very, very quickly. It had a very short development time, and there was a lot of material that was written and was submitted to Games Workshop, and they said, we want you to do something different. I believe the setting material was originally like Ben Counter, and then it was Dan Abnett, and then I was also told that the ending adventure, the original adventure in Dark Heresy, was heavily rewritten from its first appearance as well.
Okay.
And the way it was explained to me is kind of a marathon. They had to like really race, and it's like a matter of weeks, is my understanding. Is
Oh,
that
wow.
the whole thing finally came together in the 11th hour.
Well,
really
and it's quite funny because that almost leads into the next thing, with it being kind of coming together so quickly. My next question was sort of about, because somewhat infamously, Black Industries closed like 2 days after First Edition Dark Heresy came out. Do you have any information? Was that something that everyone knew was coming for a while, or was that just didn't meet the opening sales target, you're gone?
So I'm not in the picture yet. Like this is
That's
still,
true. Yeah, that's before
this
you
is
came
all
in.
before my time, but it shocked me, certainly.
Yeah.
Like I was paying very close attention to the release of Dark Heresy. I was really excited about it, and it seemed like it was out, and then boom, they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was just like overnight. And I never did actually, like, you'd have to ask, probably Kate Flack would be the one who would know the most about like what actually happened here. But
yeah,
the thing is, big companies like Games Workshop, they go through reorganizations all the time.
Oh yeah.
And this could have been anything from a shareholder call to just somebody got a weird idea one day, we don't need this, and shut it down. But at the end of the day, you also got to realize is that role-playing games, no matter how much we love them, generate just a little bit of profit, just a tiny bit of profit compared to
they don't earn
how
that much.
Biggest reigns so right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's anybody's guess, but Kate would be the one to be able to tell you the real facts.
Okay, makes sense. So there are still some mysteries that we have to hum and haw about. So coming
I
off
wish I knew.
Well, that's all right. So I wanted to ask next about I had originally gotten the timeline wrong. I thought you jumped from Black Industries into FFG, so I was going to ask about that. But instead, I will ask what sort of stuff were you doing at Fantasy Flight Games prior to Dark Heresy coming into the picture, and once it did, what was it like? What was the team like? What kind of support did you guys get from Games Workshop?
This is a great story. So I actually was just doing freelancing. I had written some things for their D20 products in the early 2000s, and I think the last thing I'd done for them was like 2000, would have been 2007, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, that's not true. It would have been 2005. Would have been the last thing I did for them.
Right.
And they knew me as like a good freelancer, right? Like
right.
But they also knew that I worked for Games Workshop.
Yes.
At that time, when I was freelancer for them, I was working full time at Games Workshop as well.
Yeah.
So they had an open call early in 2008 for writers for D&D 4th edition, which I was like, hey, I like to work, I'd love to work with some D&D products, and I had a good relationship with Fantasy Flight as a freelancer. So I sent them, notification that I was interested if they were going to do some D&D 4th edition products. And as we all know now, they never did do that, right? They never went into the D&D market. And so instead, I got around April of 2008, I got a contact from the company, and they said, we would like to talk to you about working for us as a 40K developer, because they had got the license by April of 2008. They had picked up the license for for 40K, and I interviewed, and I was flown out to Minnesota, and then I moved to Minnesota because I got the job, and I was actually the first hire.
Oh wow!
The game at the time, Fantasy Flight had basically one editor, Michael Hurley, who was sort of tasked with the job of, let's build a role-playing game department. The guy I had been working with during my freelancing years, he was no longer there, so it was basically just Michael.
Yeah.
So he hired me, and then the very next day they hired Jay Little, who took over Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it was a team of two. And then we started growing from there. There was a guy that was an editor who worked with us named Sam Stewart. He was really, really good. I said, hey, let's bring him in. So we got Sam Stewart. We put him on the team. There was a guy I knew from Games Workshop when I'd worked in Maryland named Tim Huckleberry. And I said, let's get Tim on board because he knows 40K and he loves role-playing games.
Yeah.
We built that team over the next 3 years. We built that team up to about 6 or 7 people. Andy Fisher and Chris Gerber. And we had, by the time I left the company, which was 2011, we had one of the largest permanent teams of RPG designers in the industry. Like, I think we were probably second only to WotC and Paizo.
Well, and that was quite, there were quite a lot of games coming out of, quite a lot of really good role-playing games coming out of Fantasy Flight during that era. So it's very cool to see kind of that form. I know that I have plenty of people who are playing Star Wars Edge of the Empire who were people who are asking about that kind of stuff in the channel as well. So they will be interested to hear some of this stuff as well. I personally was a big fan of End of the World RPG, which I believe was a port from a Spanish game, wasn't it?
The End of the World series, I don't know. That was after I left.
Oh, fair enough.
I think Andy Fisher was in charge of those, though.
I quite like them.
No, they're good, but I think the thing that I would want to stress to you is that the period of time that I spent at Fantasy Flight, the schedule was aggressive.
Oh, I'm sure.
Very aggressive. And we were, I mean, the job was to get out, I think, like, when I first got there, they talked about, like, let's get 4 books a year, right? Mm-hmm. And then they were like, well, how can we do 5? Can we do 6? And before you know, we were like, I mean, you can look at the amount of products
the release schedule was aggressive. Yeah.
We made a lot of books in a short period of time. And I remember going to the Christmas parties every year there, and they would put up like, here's all the things we made this year. And like the 40K line was a big section of that table because we made a lot of product. It's interesting. I mean, when I first came on board, there was, I think, 3 products. There was the core book, there was Inquisitor's Handbook, and there was the adventure series. I forget what it was called, Purge and Clean, I think. And there was like a few, like a portfolio. There was a few like minor products, but the 3 main books were those, and everything else was not done. And they said, okay, we have three products. Can we make a game line? What are we going to make?
Yeah.
And we had the manuscript for Edge of we had Edge of Darkness, which was our quick start, was another project. We like retooled that a little bit. But the one that I'm thinking of is Disciples of the Dark Gods. We had the manuscript for Disciples of the Dark Gods, and it hadn't been edited, it hadn't been laid out, it was just written. That was it. Mm-hmm. And that was the last thing to kind of come over from Black Industries. But man, was that book good.
Oh, absolutely.
Disciples,
well, it's so
is amazing.
Yeah, it's such an incredible thing to hear, in a sense, just because those books and especially those early titles are very, very beloved. So it's really quite incredible to hear that it was written at such a frantic sort of pace. So I just have to say my hat's off to you and the whole team you were working with, because the products turned out wonderfully.
Thank you. Well, I mean, this is kind of turning into a bit of a deep dive, and if you want to move on, you just let me know. But the Disciples of Dark Gods was in fact like such a high priority, and we were still kind of putting together like the production line for what we needed to get done. So we were able to get a cover made, but all the interior art on, well, not all, but the majority of the interior art on Disciples of Dark Gods was just pre-existing art that we took from the card games and we took from the codexes, and so we were still gearing up while building Disciples of the Dark Gods. The first real product that we made, like start to finish, is Creatures Anathema, and we actually, by that time, we had a pipeline set up so that we were commissioning our own artwork and we were hiring our own writers and putting together the big products. But like the whole thing about the early Dark Heresy days is this is all very building things out of scraps.
Yeah.
The Inquisitor's Handbook is actually pieces that were left over from I believe I was told by Tim Huckleberry, who worked on parts of Inquisitor's Handbook, that Inquisitor's Handbook was built out of parts that they had either cut from the core book for space, or project they had started but couldn't finish in time. And they were like, well, we had all these things lying around, let's put them into one book and call it a player's guide. So Inquisitor's Handbook was born.
Well, and that's so funny because I noticed that for my second edition games that I would always play, that was probably my favorite book to port over bits and pieces from first edition into second, because that book just felt like it had so much of every little thing. So that's quite funny to hear that that's kind of its background. We were talking about the Inquisitor's Handbook. Where were we?
I would say I think we were saying I was going to revisit it. We revisited this later because we rebuilt the Sisters of Battle careers in, I believe it's Blood of Martyrs. And it's not that the Inquisitor's Handbook stuff was bad, but we wanted to better represent what a starting sister would be like. Anyway, so yeah, the Inquisitor's Handbook was really cool. It was very evocative. It did a lot of cool world building, like Gunmetal City and other things. Ambulon. Mm-hmm. So the Calixtic sector in general is a really interesting place.
Oh, absolutely.
And there was just like a map, and it was, some of the world's detailed, others were not. And it set the tone. Like, this was very much what Kate and Owen and Mike did with the original book. Really, that was our guideline from then on. We used that to build basically everything. But I was just starting my career as a developer. I'd never been in charge of a book from start to finish until Creatures Anathema, which I'm happy to say won an award. It was really, like, people liked it.
Fantastic.
But one thing I screwed up on that book is I basically got a whole bunch of writing that was way too big for the product. We had to expand the page count from the initial pitch, and we ended up with a bunch of material that I later recycled into some other projects. One of the things I started out wanting to do is I wanted to put a thought for the day on every page.
Oh, yeah.
And I started out doing that, and then I ran out of thoughts for the day very quickly because This was a 144-page book. And I'm like, there's no way we're going to be able to do that. I had to scrap that idea early on.
Yeah.
One of the first things, literally, like when I sat down for my interview, like, what do you want to do with Dark Heresy? And I said, Mechanicus. We need to do the Lathe Worlds.
Yes.
Right. And what's funny is we didn't get around to that until the very end of the line. It was like the last book. The first one I wanted to do is actually the last book we made.
Well, sometimes
or one of the last books. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Dark Heresy was wild. It was people write stories about this stuff all the time. I saw a lot of them on 4chan back in the day.
Yes.
Write stories about their characters and the crazy stuff that you get up to because of the swinginess of the percentile system. And go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, this wasn't on my questions list, but how can I not ask? Were all of you on the dev team? Were you all enjoying the all guardsmen party?
Of course, yeah. I tried to put as many Easter eggs as possible into the books. I put in. You can go to 1D4chan actually and see like all the things that we added from traditional games, but. Yeah, we did a lot of Easter eggs to things we liked in the hobby. We were aware of All Guardsmen. There was a web comic that somebody was doing, I think, called the I can't remember what it was called anymore, but it was a really cool little web comic, like Order of the Stick style. There were people who were really engaged with Dark Heresy. They were building miniatures for their parties and posting up fan art like crazy. It was a big hit, and the passion really pushed us forward, I think, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Now, I could talk about Dark Heresy all day, but I shouldn't be selfish, and we should move on a little bit. So, when the system started to move on to Rogue Trader and all the other, I won't say spin-offs because they were quite self-contained, but the peer sibling lines, how early on was that stuff planned, and how easily did the work shift come into those?
So the plan from Black Industries had been to do the 3 games, Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader, and Deathwatch. They had already planned those.
Okay.
But that plan amounted to, we want to do those books. There
right,
was
that
no
was as
plan.
far as it went.
Literally, that's as far as it went. So I came in and I, during the onboarding process, basically with Fantasy Flight, I said, I think we should do that. I think we should make more game lines because basically people were just eating it up. They were crazy for 40K role play, and it was doing really, really well.
We are now back. So, sorry, we experienced a brief technical issue there. If the cuts are a little bit jumpy, I apologize to everybody. So, what we were just talking about was how the plan was originally for all of the sibling lines to Dark Heresy. So we'll just pick up back from there.
Right. So there was Black Industries had a plan for the 3 books in that they had decided that this is what they wanted to do, but there was no guidance beyond we want to do Rogue Trader and Deathwatch. And so when I came on board with Fantasy Flight, I said we should definitely follow that. I think it was a great idea, and everybody backed me up on this, that this was a good idea. These were the natural places to go with roleplay.
Yeah.
And then we started talking about like what would the future hold. So we started throwing ideas around. The one I was a big fan of was I wanted to do an Eldar RPG.
Oh yeah, that would have been very cool.
We talked about it, we discussed it, and ultimately I was overruled, and they said we should do Black Crusade instead. And I was like, all right.
I would have loved it. Eldar, probably my favorite part of 40K.
they're crazy cool. So that was the big game pitch that never went anywhere. But Only War originally was just going to be a source book. Dark Heresy. We even announced it. We even announced like, hey, we're going to do a source book called Only War. And then we started talking about like, hey, what would be in this book? And before you know it, the size just grew and grew and grew. Because we're like, wow, we could have guardsmen, and we could have ogrins, we could have ratlings, and we could have all the vehicles. And I'm like, there's no way that's going to fit in a standard size source book. That's going to, it's going to be its own line.
Yeah. And
so we created the whole idea of the sort of stub crusade that was happening off to the side there. And by this time I was actually transitioned over to working on Star Wars, but I was helping out a lot on Only War. And it was fun to see something that we'd come up with as an idea for something little grow into something really, really big.
That's so cool. And I know a lot of people who really love Only War, so that's another one where it's funny to hear that it was kind of a happy accident. And it almost sounds like a lot of this was like your team was so good, you guys could not fail at anything at that time, which is wonderful.
Oh, I wish that were true. I wish that was true.
So moving on from that, so once all the first edition stuff was done, I understand this is around the time when you moved out of FFG, but were you involved at all in the decision-making process to end the first edition lines and to go into second edition of Dark Heresy?
Not directly, no. But I did know a lot of people that were working on it. Tim Huckleberry, who we talked about before, he ended up being a really big driver behind the second edition.
Yeah.
And I believe that once we'd done Deathwatch and Black Crusade, which are really pushed the envelope as far as the power scale of that, we had come up with a lot of really great game lines, but they didn't all mesh well together.
Right.
So the goal with second edition of Dark Heresy was to create a rule set that would be a lot more harmony between all of those different things. It would be a better launching off point. And really what it was that we learned over those years, what you can and can't do with percentile systems.
What is this? Oh, shoot. We'll just ignore that for now, and if we have to rehost the meeting in a second, we will.
So we'd taken a lot of the lessons we learned along the way for building things in the percentile gate system, and Tim was like, let's make a new edition of the game using the things that we've learned. And it's really quite good. The big deal that I'm aware of only secondhand is that Games Workshop basically insisted that you had to make a new setting, because the Calixtus sector was connected to, the Chronos Expanse, is connected to the Jericho Reach, connected to the Screaming Vortex. They wanted a fresh start. They wanted a place where there weren't, 600 Inquisitors running around. So that's one of the reasons why they created the Askelion sector for the second edition. But in my opinion, I think one of the things we did really, really well with was world building in that the first edition games have this great connected world set that I'm really proud of.
And that's one of the things that all the players talk about. When people talk about the pros and cons of all the editions, a lot of it comes down to streamlined rules in second edition and whatever, but do you really want to give up the Calixtus sector? So it's definitely a very well-beloved setting, and you guys really nailed it there.
Thank you. Well, we had a good foundation to build on. Again, Kate, Owen, and Mike were the original builders.
That's awesome. So moving on from there, so this is where the two of us have started to connect on this story. So we got into second edition, but it felt like the releases were a little tentative compared to first edition, and we very soon had the breakup of the partnership between Fantasy Flight and Games Workshop. And you weren't in the team at the time, but you were probably in contact with a lot of this. So the big question everyone wants to know is what happened?
Well, the short answer is Star Wars.
Yes.
Because so Star Wars is a big get. It's a big get for anybody.
Huge, yeah.
And Fantasy Flight was like, okay, we've done well with all the licenses we've had so far, but this is the license.
Yeah. And
the decisions was to put basically all the oomph they could behind the Star Wars stuff. So the miniatures game lines, the role-playing game, etc. So one of the reasons why there's not so much second edition material is because they were shifting focus, and they shifted a lot of focus away from that and onto Star Wars, which I think anybody here would understand. That's
a smart business decision. Despite my own personal love of Dark Heresy, I understand the business decision.
but the nail in the coffin was the miniature side, because once Fantasy Flight started making miniatures games for Star Wars, X-Wing, etc., they became a competitor for Games Workshop. And Games Workshop's policy, again, which makes perfect sense, they don't license games, or they don't license their IP to competitors in their main area of business, which is the miniature side. So once that happened, it was essentially inevitable. Again, Fantasy Flight had a good run. Those games had a nice long lifespan. I don't think anybody should feel like they were just aborted in the womb, because that's just not true. But that's my understanding. That's what happened.
Okay, that makes sense. And now I can go into my comment section and correct all those people who were telling me I was wrong about what happened. But so my pettiness aside, so moving on from that, we started to get into Wrath and Glory, which was like a year later it started to form, from my understanding, maybe earlier. So I would love to hear your story about this. What happened with how we got into Ulysses Spiele, and how Cubicle 7 got the rights so quickly. I just love to hear the whole story of how Wrath and Glory came in. And another thing that a lot of people are wondering about is, was there a rights issue with continuing the old lines, and what was the decision to converge everything into a new line? I know that's a lot of questions at once. I'll just let you talk.
Okay, so the story of Wrath and Glory begins around 2016. I started working for Ulysses Spiela as a freelancer on Torg Eternity, and I'm really proud of Torg Eternity, by the way. It's such a badass product. But I started working with them then, and right after we got to a good point for Torg Eternity, where it was basically off to Kickstarter. I got a contact from them saying, hey, we have the license for 40K and we'd like you to, kind of like with fantasy, like we'd like you to come in and lead it. And I said, that sounds awesome. I'm so excited to do a new version of, the game line. And we had some early discussions about what that would look like. There was no rights issue. I mean, literally, Marcus, the guy in charge of Ulysses, was like, how about Dark Heresy 3rd edition? And I was resistant. So here's where I become the most hated man in the comment section. I was very resistant to doing just Dark Heresy 3rd edition. The last product for Dark Heresy 2nd had come out less than a year earlier.
Yeah, that's so recent.
And I was like, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I don't know if that's like, I feel like we've gone to the well too many times. And at that time, I just didn't have any fresh ideas for Dark Heresy. I was like, I know how to do a Dark Heresy game, certainly, but I don't know how to do it where it would be significantly different. Now I do. I have a great idea for Dark Heresy 3rd edition, but back then I didn't.
Yeah.
So so Marcus is like, well, what do you think we should do? What would be some example, something for you? And I was wanting to really stretch my wings as a game designer. I wanted to create my own game system. And I said, if you let me make my own game system, I'd really like to do that. And here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to make one game system that will work for all levels of play, where you can be an acolyte in the Inquisition, and you can also be a Space Marine, and you can also play an Eldar and an Orc. And I wanted to build something kind of like World of Darkness had done, where they had one rule book, and then they built all of their additional ways to play it off of that. So the goal was to make Wrath and Glory, which was going to be you can play almost anything game, and then we were going to build supplementary games around them, like a game about playing Eldar again, back to that, and a game about playing Space Marines. And man, we had so many ideas. We were going to do like a Last Chancers game that was going to be our only war kind of version. Was going to be you play as the Last Chancers. We had we got quite a ways down the path for building an Eldar game, including we had a whole campaign sketched out where you go to like an Exodite world, and it was crazy. You go to a Crone world. It was amazing. And then we had just so many ideas of what we could have done. So I really what I just wanted to make sure to get clear was the two main goals we wanted with Wrath Glory was A, new system that I could create, and B, a foundation, a launching pad for different types of games that would allow you to explore like every possible experience in the 40K setting.
Well, and I think you guys have really achieved that. As I said, I'm currently reading Wrath and Glory right now. I had kind of been at the point where I had moved away from my Dark Heresy group right around the time when 2nd edition ended, so it wasn't so much that I never picked up Wrath and Glory, it was just that I didn't have a group anymore. And now that I've gotten interested in it again, I'm reading up on Wrath and Glory, and I'm really enjoying it, honestly. I have that kind of the new content jitters of like, ooh, there's all this new stuff that I haven't played with yet. So I think
there's a lot going on with Wrath of Glory. It has a tumultuous history.
Yes.
So this is like we started at this point, but this was again like 2017, and just in the middle of that year, Games Workshop was like, "Hey, new edition of 40K, and we've split the galaxy in half, and it was like." Everything changed.
Yeah.
One of the Primarchs was back. I was like, oh my god! Like, so it kind of blew up our original proposal. We'd been working with
that all kind of happened right in the middle of production, did it? Oh wow!
Pre-production. I would say more pre-production.
Oh,
we were, we'd worked out a lot of stuff with the licensing team. I had a great conversation with Phil Kelly about a lot of stuff. But things that we had agreed were good ideas were kind of no longer a thing, because after 8th edition and the galaxy split in half, the idea was no longer that you could go anywhere. The idea was no longer that you could be doing Imperial Guard things and Rogue Trader things and this, So the guidance from Games Workshop was to shrink it down. Like let's have one system that you're in, and it has to be in the other side of the galaxy. It has to be in the I forget what it's called, the Nihilus, Imperium Nihilus.
Yeah.
So we, it was a lot of shifting gears. We had to drastically change our approach and say, okay, so now we're in one little system, and that means we can't include quite as many things as we wanted to from before. And we had to work a lot of story magic to say, okay, and there's Eldar over here, and there's orcs over here, and there's chaos. We try to keep it really interesting, but it's a lot harder to do that. Our sandbox shrank so small that it was like, I don't know, can we make this work? It was like a little box.
Well, and you know what? I find that sometimes being stuck in a box really breeds innovation. And I just read all the lore on in the core book on the Gilead system today, and it's really impressive how cleanly it all fits together.
Okay, so the Black Library authors are a big help. Ben Counter came up with a lot of the original foundation for it. And then Aaron Dembski-Bowden is a huge fan. He loves role play in 40K.
Oh, fantastic.
Just loves it. And he was like, hey, how can I get involved? And I'm like, dude, whatever you want. So basically we took Ben Counter's treatment and gave it to Dembski-Bowden, and he wrote, he really fleshed it all out. And then that got further tuned in the Cubicle 7 side. Now, that's probably the part you want to talk about.
Yes,
now.
I do want to talk about that. So how did we get from Ulysses to Cubicle 7?
Okay, I can't get into a great deal of detail
this
here.
is recent, so I assume there's some NDAs at play, but whatever you can tell us.
I can tell you that it was a very similar situation with Fantasy Flight, whereas Ulysses picked up a game that had a lot of miniatures in it and was going to be... it was perceived as a competitor, and that basically meant, well, you can't have the license anymore. So they worked out a deal with Dom over at Cubicle 7, and they were doing WIFRIP. So it was perfect sense to say, okay, why don't you guys run this? And the Cubicle 7 team, those guys are sharp. They're super great to work with. The resources they had at their disposal were also... Ulysses has an issue with bandwidth. They have a really great machine for producing products for certain lines,
right?
But it means that other lines really struggle. Torg Eternity managed to get made thanks to a lot of really great, talented people getting behind it, pushing, and making it work. But the timelines for Wrath and Glory were really, really tight, and it just wasn't able to get the care that it needed at Ulysses. But over at Cubicle 7, they're like, hey, we've got this artist, and we've got this artist, and we've got this producer, and they gave me the team that I didn't have at Ulysses. They're like, here's like 5 people that are going to help you make this book. And I'm like, woo. Zach Dale Clutterbuck is the producer I worked with over there. Really great guy. And we took in all the feedback from all the people who'd played Wrath of Glory before, and use that to really refine it, to kind of create a 1.5 version, if you will. And it's rare, super rare for a designer to get 2 bites at the apple. So I was like, hell yeah, what can we do? And sometimes you swing and you miss, and I feel like the Ulysses version is kind of a swing and a miss. But the Cubicle 17 were like an outfielder that picked it up, threw it back to base, and we got a nice good home run out of it.
Well, that's awesome.
At the end of the day. Yeah,
it's really good to hear. So hang on. Right, yeah, so I was just going to ask, so has COVID affected the Wrath and Glory team and the production side of things over the last couple of years?
Okay, well, just to be really clear, my only involvement in the Cubicle 7 side was the core book.
Right.
And after that, that's all them.
Right.
But I have to believe that you certainly did. I was out. I was no longer involved by the time COVID rolled around, but I'm certainly have to believe it had some kind of impact on slowing down everything.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, fair enough then. So then maybe you don't have the answer to this next question, but that one of the ones I was going to ask is do you know if the Wrath and Glory team is in contact at all with Owlcat Games? Being that they're doing the Rogue Trader book, but
I sure don't. Listen, I love Owlcat. Owlcat's great.
oh, I love them. And when I suddenly heard that they got the Rogue Trader license, I was bouncing up and down.
I can't wait to see what they do with it. The Coronis Expanse is my baby. Like that's the first setting, because the Calixtus Sector I didn't start. That was started by the other guys. We developed it a lot, which is really, really cool. But the Coronis Expanse was the first time me as a creator was like able to say, here's what this is going to be like.
Right.
And it's near and dear to my heart. I just cannot wait to see what they've done with it. It's going to be great. I have no doubt it's going to be great.
I have all the faith in the world in them. So in that case, just a couple more questions, and then we can just kind of go free flow, I think.
All right.
So one of the things one of my players had asked me to pass along as a question is, what are there any major differences in your sort of design philosophies for Wrath and Glory compared to the old FFG lines?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, obviously consolidated, but any major balancing concerns and stuff like that you guys weren't focusing on then that you are now? We just want to hear the nitty gritty of it all.
So some of the lessons we learned from the original lines was that percentile works great at lower levels, but doesn't scale very well.
Right.
You have to introduce like a lot of subsystems, or you have to basically build in different ways for the dice resolution to function if you're going to have stats that go above, say, 40 or 50. Right. And I recently played RuneQuest, and they also had to address this issue. They have a very similar percentile-based system.
Yeah.
So with Wrath and Glory, we said, okay, let's basically create tiers of play, because it's very difficult to have a group of Inquisitional acolytes next to a Space Marine and have the Space Marine still feel like a Space Marine where they don't feel completely outclassed by the Space Marine. And so creating tiers of play allowed us to say, if you want to do a Dark Heresy style game, you just play tier 1 or tier 2. And one of the other things we learned was that psychers tend to be like way more powerful than they would initially appear.
Yes.
So in Wrath and Glory, we basically took all the psychers and said, what tier do they fit in? And then we made them one tier higher.
Right.
So a Space Marine is a tier 4 or tier 3. I forget. I think it's 3. And then like a Space Marine Librarian would be a tier 4 because they're one step higher. So a Psyker, our standard Inquisitional Psyker is actually a tier 2 character. If you want to play a tier 1 game, he may not be a great fit because just having psychic powers makes you really strong.
Yes, it does.
So that was something else we learned. It's funny because Dark Heresy in a lot of ways was, I hate using this term, it's the only thing that applies. In a lot of ways, it was kind of the Dark Souls of tabletop role-playing games, because it was really hard, and you could all die very quickly, very easily. Your Psyker could roll something crazy on the table, and then everybody's dead.
Yeah.
And what's funny is people loved that. It
was great.
Loved that swingy, crazy, anything can happen feel. So when you do your psychic tables for crazy shit to happen, we were very influenced by the idea that people kind of want crazy shit to happen.
Yes.
Even though it may completely bone your team when they're out in the field trying to get a job done. So there was that. We tried to take as many lessons as we could about, keeping combat something that flows, but still feels right. It's hard. It's really hard. And as many times as I've worked on this line, I don't even know that I would be able to perfectly capture what people have in their head for 40K, because the tabletop is so different from the novels, which is so different from the video games, which is so different from how tabletop works.
Well, it's true. And I think at the end of the day, all of the different expressions of Warhammer 40,000, all the different mediums kind of have their own individual fandoms who expect their own things. And so long as the role-playing crowd is satisfied with the role-playing expression of Wrath and Glory and Warhammer 40,000 in general, then I would say you're fulfilling the only design objective that matters.
Well, thank you. I mean, just give you an example of expectations.
Yeah.
If you're playing a tabletop game of Warhammer 40K,
Mhm.
and you have a Space Marine and you have a Guardsman, there's a chance that Guardsman can kill the Space Marine with his
Yes.
last guy. It's not a big chance, but he can do it.
Yeah.
And it's not even a small chance. It's like a 33 or a 16% chance, something like that. But if you read the novels,
Yeah, no way.
that just doesn't happen unless you're God's Ghost and you have like a crazy, a really nice big weapon or a big explosion. And then if you play the video games, right, they'll play Dawn of War or something like that. Again, it's possible, but you're talking about again a very different viewpoint on things. So in the tabletop game, we had to think about like, okay, so in a miniature game, a Terminator has a 5+ vulnerable save. That means he gets stepped on by a Titan. There's a percent chance that he can just get up and be okay.
Right.
Like, and we had to say, like, is that something we want to be possible, or should that be like, no, that's a Titan stepping on you, you're done. I don't care if you're turning. So, there's a lot of balancing issues. And then, of course, the weapon ranges are all based on the tabletop ranges, which are all like really short because the table's only 4 feet long. It's a real mess, and trying to get it all in a coherent form is a lot of work. It's a big challenge. And we had to rebalance our weapon rules even mid game, like the Deathwatch. When we did Deathwatch, we had to release like an errata that was like, here's all the weapon damage, and it's better, it's fixed. Go do this instead of what's in the core book, because we were still building off of what our Heresy had established. And anyway, it just the headaches you experience while working on 40K.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things that have to go through your mind as a designer. Is what are people going to expect to be able to do? What should be possible, and what should be likely, and what should be impossible.
Well, and are there any compromises you felt that you were particularly dissatisfied with having to make to kind of match those cross-platform expectations? Anything that you really didn't want to put in the game but really had to go?
I mean, there's stuff that I was resistant to adding, certainly.
Right.
Morale rules for tabletop was something I was like, I don't like. The idea of leadership as a stat is cool, but I don't know. I didn't really want player characters to be running away very often unless it was something really scary, and I definitely didn't want to make it to where making your enemy run away was the optimal solution.
Right.
But I think if I had to pick like one thing that just didn't go quite as we wanted, it was squad mode for Deathwatch.
Right.
One of the original plans I had was this idea of a squad character sheet, and you would like flip it, like you'd flip the character sheet to say like, okay, we're acting as individuals or we're acting as a team, because what Deathwatch was all about was you were being forced to work together, and you had to learn to be a team and function together. So my idea that you would have a physical representation of when you changed your mindset from I'm individual to I'm now part of a team was something we actually had a plan to address this. And I was working on something one day, and the boss comes into the room and he's like, listen, we gotta move up Deathwatch by I think 2 months.
Oh, I see.
I lost 2 months of development time, and all of a sudden this really cool idea I kind of had to give to one of my very talented freelancers, Owen Barnes, to say, okay, here's what I wanted to do, like, see what you can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately Owen did a great job. Like, it's not his fault. It's me. It's basically us just not having enough time to let that breathe. And if I run Deathwatch games, which I have, I say we're just not going to do squad mode. like I just throw that out the window. I'm like, we're all solo all the time. Just go with it. So there you go.
Well, fair enough then. Okay, so I think that's the majority of the stuff that I specifically wanted to talk about. So I guess we can just open things up. Is there anything we missed in all this that you want to tell us about with sort of just the story of the 40K role-playing lines?
Oh, well, I mean, there's so many little cool bits that were a lot of fun to work on. In the creation of Rogue Trader, we decided that the main antagonists would actually be other Rogue Traders. Like you would have, certainly there's orcs out there, right, in the Krennic's Expanse, and they are a danger, and there's other aliens and things like that. But we wanted it also to be kind of a race. Like, this was going to be a brand new area, and there was going to be other Rogue Traders out there who were more powerful than you and more established than you.
Right.
And it was to give the player both a yardstick to measure themselves against, and also rivals or potential allies.
Yeah.
And some of the guys we created for that, some of the Rogue Traders in that game are so eccentric and so cool. We have one of our guys is basically like the Chuck Norris of space. I love that. It was Winter something or other. He was this guy. He has a whole area in the map that's like his part. And when we talked about him, we always were like, this is the Chuck Norris of space. When we talk about him, he is the best, the greatest. That way you can compare yourself to aspirationally to be, what you want to become.
Mm-hmm.
And we had another guy who was just the Han Solo scumbag, like won his writ of trade in a card game, and had a trophy room on his ship that included a giant velvet painting of him wrestling a bear. Just
he's the perfect rogue trader.
he was meant to be like the tackiest, like just had no class guy, but he was so fun to write about, and we would just keep running into him. Stuff like that. Those are little bits from Rogue Trader that were cool. And in Deathwatch we created the 3 salients,
right,
which were different enemies that you were fighting in the Reach. One salient was all alternates all the time, one was all chaos all the time, and the last one was Tau.
Right.
And I forget which. I think it's the chaos salient. But we created this character, Magrotha von Karlak, and we decided that she was just like propaganda decided that she was the thing.
Right.
So whenever we wrote about Magrotha von Karlak, she was doing incredible, like she took a power fist and one punched a Bane blade, and she did this, she did that, and we wrote about her as the craziest, most amazing person. I think we were trying to do was like a Commissar Kane type approach. That her legend had outgrew her a long time ago. But the legend was the reason it was so important that she not die, that she had to be part of what was going on in the Salient, because if she were to the legend had gotten so big that if she were to die, it would actually destroy morale. Things like that. These are little fun little bits that we would put into the game, and they're so great even now to think about. The first Deathwatch adventure was a free RPG Day product about a world being invaded by Tyranids, and so I was saying there's a lot of kind of wacky stuff in the line because we had so much fun building them.
Yeah.
And there's a free RPG Day adventure for Deathwatch, which involves the world being invaded by Tyranids. And the second act, you have to negotiate. You have to basically talk to the planetary governor.
Yeah.
And on free RPG Day, myself, Sam Stewart, who was running Rogue Trader at the time, and Mac Martin, who was running Dark Heresy at the time, we were all going to run the same adventure on the same day.
Right.
And we basically said, let's make a gentleman's bet. Like, let's all run the planetary governor at different levels of asshole and see what happens.
Yeah.
So Sam decided he was going to run like a very kind, very caring, planetary governor he wants to work with the Space Marines, that guy, I decided I was going to play the middle. I was going to be like, asshole level 5. He's planetary governor. He's not completely unreasonable, but he's really not into listening to anybody else.
Yeah.
And Max said he's going to turn his up to 10. Right? He wanted to have the absolutely unlikable planetary governor, and we were going to see what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, we all got back together, compared notes, and Sam was like, "Oh, my guys, they were fine." The Space Marines were like, "Oh, hey, hi, planetary governor, let's work with you to get rid of these Tyranids, evacuate the planet." And it was fine. Everybody had a great time. I'm like, "Cool." And I said, "My group, they walked in, they had a brief discussion, kind of got what they wanted, and then they killed him." They shot the planetary governor because he was derelict in his duties. And everyone was like, "Yeah, that's probably what would happen if the planet was completely unprepared for this," which it kind of was. And then we turned to Max and said, "How did it go?" And Max says, "They shot him 2 seconds after I introduced him." Like he was able to say like, "Hey, you." Well, apparently Mac had decided that when the Space Marines appear, the governor's mansion was having a full-on gala party, like everybody in masks,
in the middle of the invasion,
just decadent as hell. And the mayor or the governor is like, "Oh yes, of course, once this minor nuisance is dealt with, it would be back to just absolutely a worm." and I loved it. I was like, oh, that's so lovely. I of course, some Space Marine's gonna be like, "Yeah, no, boom, next."
That's awesome.
So yeah, these are the fun little bits that happen in the 40K line.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm so glad to hear that the team had fun with all of this in the creation as well. So I could ask questions all day, but we have probably covered the main topic, so we can probably end things for today. And again, thank you so much for showing up for an interview today. I know I really appreciate it. A lot of viewers who are still asking questions, they're very interested in all this as well. So you've really helped us clear up a lot of long-standing questions that everyone has had. And once again, we're here at the end of the video, so in case people have forgotten from the beginning, where can they find you?
Sure thing. By the way, thank you very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure. I'd love to come back anytime if you want to talk about any particular book or particular question. I can probably get into it. As for me, I am at the Ross Watson on Twitter, and you can check out all of the cool stuff I'm doing on my Patreon at patreon.com/the Ross Watson.
Fantastic. So I will have all of that information down in the description below. And for now, I will see you guys next week.